Toyota Hilux and Ford Ranger have been Australia's two most popular utes for years now, and buyers can now choose between two top spec performance variants. On one side we have the Toyota Hilux GR Sport, and on the other, the Ford Ranger Raptor. Now, it's high time that we got these two together to flesh out the differences and see what the most compelling offering is as a top spec, performance-oriented four-wheel drive ute, and that includes off-road driving, on-road driving, and living with this kind of vehicle around town. It is a strange combination, a vehicle that is built around utility and capacity as a workhorse, but now it's got upgrades to the driveline, suspension, wheels, and tyres for extra performance. But there's no denying the popularity of such a vehicle, and I'm not just talking about in Australia. This is a global phenomenon. The Ford Ranger Raptor is the pinnacle of its own range, and it's the most expensive of these two by a fair margin. However, it's also bigger, it packs a meatier petrol punch from under the bonnet, and has more thorough upgrades to the chassis, suspension, and tyres. Prices have been creeping up since the new Ranger Raptor originally launched, but you're now looking at $89,190 plus on-road costs in 2024. The Hilux GR Sport is the cheaper of these two, with an asking price of $74,310 plus on-road costs. So this makes it almost $15,000 less expensive than the Ranger Raptor before you start worrying about those extra charges. For those who want some workhorse capability, both of these performance-orientated utes are limited in this regard. Payload takes a hit for both vehicles, but the Hilux's 780 kilos beats the 657 kgs in the Raptor. The Hilux also keeps a 3.5-ton braked towing capacity, but the Raptor gets by with only 2.5 tons. So if you're interested in mixing a bit of business and pleasure, there is an argument here for the Hilux. This is the interior of the Hilux GR Sport, and if you've been watching a lot of drive videos recently, I hope you have, you'll know that we did an in-depth review of this exact car. We took it off-road, we did an interior run-through, we did a lot of towing as well. So if you want a lot of the nitty-gritty detail, I would suggest watching that video. But for this one, I just want to do a little bit more of a direct comparison with the Ranger Raptor. And with that in mind, it's worth pointing out, I think, that this Hilux, in terms of this generation vehicle, the 8th generation Hilux, it is towards the end of its run. And there has been a few big upgrades and updates to the Hilux over the years, but there's also been a lot of little upgrades and things that have happened, little changes to details and improvements over the life of the vehicle that Toyota don't necessarily broadcast or tell us, but you do notice them if you spend a fair amount of time with the car. And one thing you do notice with this thing is that it feels rock solid. I think that's part of the whole Hilux stick, but it does really feel it here. This center console doesn't really shift around at all. It's all mostly hard plastics, right? But hey, this is a four-wheel drive ute, so I'm not going to criticize a working vehicle for having working surfaces. But at the same time, when you're talking about this sort of asking price, and in comparison to the Ranger Raptor, it probably doesn't feel as special overall. We've got some different materials happening here, but it just looks like a fairly basic sort of vinyl wrap there. There's no actual difference, and we'll see in the Ranger Raptor how different that is. In terms of storage, you've got a similar setup here. You've got a second glove box, you've got pop-out cup holders. That is the same as the Raptor, and you do have special seats here as well. Now, these are definitely not as aggressive as the Raptor in terms of looks, and it's also in terms of comfort. The Raptor feels a little bit more hugging in terms of the body. There's a lot more bolstering going on from the performance point of view. These are, I've got to say though, pretty good. They're fine. I think ergonomically, this Hilux has reach and tilt adjustment through the steering column, so you can dial yourself in pretty nicely from behind the wheel. So it might not be a special feeling in terms of the seating position and the look of the seat, but hey, it works pretty well. Now, in terms of infotainment, this is one area that has been slowly upgraded and changed over the years. Naturally, in comparison to the Ranger Raptor, this is not as big, nor is it as impressive, but it's been a little bit more stable. I think we have had issues with the Ranger Raptor system over the last bit of time since that car has come out. And this system, you know what, it's big enough, it does the job. You've got a power and volume button there. You've got another one here for tuning and scrolling through different functions. And also you've got some buttons on the outside here to help with navigating around. So it's not the last word in terms of technology, but it does the job well enough. And you can say that as well for the dual zone climate control further down here. This is Well, it's just your regular old air conditioning controls. It's all manual, it's got buttons and dials, and I think you just know what you're doing the second you get into the car, how to control this. It's a different experience in the Ford, which I will get to. And this, yes, once again, it's not a whiz-bang sort of thing. It's a bit of a KISS mentality, I suppose. Keep it simple, stupid. And it just works, right? And you've got some more buttons further down there as well. One USB point, two 12-volt outlets there, heated seats in this one, a bit of extra storage down there and some buttons. It's all just regular stuff. It doesn't mean it's bad, I don't think, and it works well. It's solid, but it's just not moving the game forward in any way, I suppose. This is the interior of the Ford Ranger Raptor, and naturally you can't miss it. You've got orange highlights everywhere, you've got a different steering wheel, and if you want to see more of this car, similar to the HiLux, we actually did an in-depth, and I mean it, review of this car. We jumped it, we did lots of cool stuff. It's in the description below, check it out. But in the meantime, let's talk about comparisons to the Toyota HiLux. There are some similarities here. Number one, you've got two glove boxes. That's similar. You've got a little one there as well. Also, there is some pop-out cup holders on either side. Now, these are a lot more sophisticated in this Ranger in terms of how they're designed and how they pop out. But it's worth noting you can't fit square-shaped drinks in the cup holders in this Ranger Raptor like you can in the HiLux. So something like a chocolate milk, a flavored milk, something like that. If you really like that, you might prefer the HiLux because you can't actually fit them in here. But you do get this handy storage shelf in front of the passenger, which does work well for throwing things like wallets and cables and keys and that sort of thing in. You've got some cup holders here. So you do get a wireless charging pad. That is handy if you use that all the time. Plus, some USB power. So this gets USB-A and USB-C. If you were paying attention with the HiLux, you'll know that there was only one USB-A there to be had, but the HiLux had two 12 volts. We've only got one 12 volt, and that's hidden in here. Also worth noting, it's actually a really cool detail. There's a USB-A port up here next to the rear view mirror, and that is for specifically powering up something like a dash camera. But it's just handy for other things as well. You can put a navigator up there when you're going off-road and touring, whatever it might be. Keeps things nice and neat. But otherwise, I think, obviously, in terms of technology, this Ranger Raptor has the HiLux beat. You've got a much bigger infotainment display with a lot more going on, but it is a little bit more finicky and a bit glitchier as well in comparison to the HiLux. So you are getting a better experience when it works. Digital cluster, that's fantastic. You've got a lot of buttons going on here, a lot of functionality, and it does work well from day to day. So this HiLux, it's definitely better, but it probably hasn't got the same feeling of solidness as you get. You've got a little bit of a wobble going on here. There's maybe an extra creak or two here and there in comparison to the HiLux. If you really, really value that idea of build quality, maybe the Toyota is better, but in other respects, and just about every respect, I've got to say this Ranger is the pick of the two. All right, here is the second row of the HiLux GR Sport, and as always, the first thing to talk about here is space. This is my driving position up front. I'm a little bit under 6 foot tall, and I do sit relatively close to the steering wheel, and in that case, I've got just a clenched fist in front of each knee there. So remember this measurement. It's very scientific, as you can see, because we'll see if the Ranger or the HiLux is better very soon. Otherwise, headroom is okay. I've got a little bit of toe room there for my feet. There's a nice rubber covering here over the floors, which I do love in a ute like this. Even if it's for kids and that sort of thing, or you're putting apprentices in the back here, that's hard wearing. It's easy to take out. You can hose it down. It vacuums well. Very, very smart thing to have, I think, in a vehicle that's being used every day. You've got air vents here. You have no power outlets, however, but you do have a couple of hooks for your take away food, I suppose. So your phone might be flat, but you can hang a bag there or something like that. There is a pop down armrest there and also a couple of cup holders. But otherwise, you know what? It's not too bad in the back here. It's definitely not the best in the segment. We know that already about the HiLux, but hey, it's pretty solid. Here's the second row of the Ford Ranger Raptor, and the first thing to talk about, as always, is size and how much space we've got in here in comparison to the Toyota HiLux. Now, you remember my testing method before. Very scientific and peer-reviewed, the fist method. Now, that's my driving position up front there. Of course, I haven't changed in height since I was in the HiLux, and that is the same position there. Now, as you can see, the seating, it actually looks kind of similar here because actually this seat is a lot thicker, and if you move your knees in a little bit further, you've got this indent here which actually affords you a fair amount of space, almost double again. So while the amount of space does look similar, there is actually more available in this Ranger, and that is because there is a longer wheelbase here. This has a longer body, and you can start to feel that most noticeably in the second row here. In terms of headroom there, this maybe has a little bit more, but not a stack more, just a touch, I think. But in terms of overall space and comfort, I think this is slightly better. Don't forget that the Ford Ranger is a larger vehicle overall. In terms of wheelbase and just general size, I think overall, this is a bigger vehicle, and you start to feel it in the second row most noticeably. I mean, all dual cab utes are a bit compromised in the second row. This is, I suppose, just one of the lesser compromised in the segment. Now, in terms of other things we've got here, there are air vents like the HiLux, but we do have USB A and C power here. So that is one up here for the Ranger. No hooks for hanging anything, I suppose, when you're doing your takeaway fish and chips or something like that. We do have some map pockets there and a drop-down armrest with 2 cup holders. That is all the same. I think I prefer the fact that the seating material in this Ranger Raptor follows on from the front a little bit more. It just makes the back passengers feel a little bit more special and included, I guess. It adds to the value of the vehicle. But otherwise, this Ranger, it does edge ahead in quite a few important areas. All right, let's have a look at the tray of the GR Sport HiLux. But if you do want to lock it, unfortunately, when you lock the car, the tailgate is not included in that. I'm just going to unlock that so the alarm doesn't go off, but you have to actually pop the key out of the key fob like this, put that in there, and it is its own sort of manual locking setup, I suppose. It's not included in the rest of the central locking of the car. So you can lock it at least, but it's not as good as the Ranger, as we'll find out in a minute. But it doesn't matter, I suppose, because this is an open tray anyway. If you were going to fit something like a canopy, it might become a little bit more of an issue down the track. But let's open this up and have a look. Leave the key there for a minute. Now we do have actually a tub liner in this HiLux. It's branded with GR Sport. It's a drop-in style tub liner. It's a multi-piece setup, as you can see, some seams around the place. It is an improvement over, say, a regular HiLux SR5, which doesn't get a tub liner at all. And I think for a ute, well, a ute just needs a tub liner for it to be used properly. So that is something. You do get 4 tie-down points, and you do get some interesting little slots to act as dividers, I suppose, built into the mold of this drop-in tub liner. So you could do some interesting things with it, I'm sure, but for the face of it, for a ute of this price, it is quite basic in terms of what you get, in terms of just outright features. I mean, it's a ute, it's a big load space, you've got a decent payload here, you can use it, I suppose, but at the end of the day, you don't get as many bells and whistles. All right, we're at the business end of the Ford Ranger Raptor now, and there are a few things to point out. Firstly, press the lock button on the car. Hey presto, look at that. Central locking works on the tailgate. You don't get that on every ute, and it is actually really handy if you're planning to use this all the time and put things in there, hoping for them to be secure. You also get an electric roller cover. You can press a button here on the key fob, press that twice, and that opens. It is reasonably waterproof, not completely waterproof, and let's face it, if a thief wants to get in, they'll find a way to get in past that. Press the unlock button there, now you can open the tailgate. Now that is spring loaded there as well. Feels a little bit nicer, a bit more premium, I suppose, in comparison to the HiLux. And we've got a load space here that in terms of size is around about the same as a HiLux, give or take a little bit here and there. We've got 6 tie-down points in here. We've got a light. We've also got a 12-volt power outlet there. And this is now a drop-in tub liner, which is an interesting point, a little bit of a change in this Ranger. I prefer spray-in personally, but it's a minor detail, and hey, you can pull this out if you want to and go back to something else if you would prefer. So that is that, but I think in terms of having a tailgate that locks, an electric roller cover, plus a few other features, I don't think I really need to spell out which is the better equipped out of this one and the HiLux. A twin turbocharged 3-litre petrol V6 makes 292 kilowatts and 583 newton meters, and that runs through a 10-speed automatic gearbox and clutch-based selectable 4-wheel drive system. There's a low-range transfer case and locking differentials front and rear. The suspension system uses coil springs all round with a Watts linkage live axle at the rear and independent suspension up front. The Fox suspension has a meaty 2.5-inch diameter, but also it's got internal bypassing and a so-called live valve for variable damping forces on the move. The rubber is beefy as well, with 33-inch BF Goodrich KO2 all-terrain tyres being used. In comparison, the Toyota Hilux GR Sport looks a little bit demure. It does come with updated suspension using taller and stiffer springs, along with red KYB monotube shock absorbers. But unlike the Raptor, we still have leaf springs at the rear in this case. 17-inch wheels are wrapped a bit uninspiringly in the same diameter tyres as you get in a regular Hilux, but the tyre is now a little bit of an upgrade. There's a fairly mild Bridgestone all-terrain tyre being used. Both of these utes have increased the ride height and wheel track, but it's the Raptor that is bigger in every direction. We've got a 3,270mm wheelbase here, along with a 1,710mm wheel track front and rear. The height is 1,926mm, and you've got a claimed 272mm of ground clearance. The Hilux GR Sport has a shorter wheelbase, only 3,085mm, and 1,670mm at the front. The Hilux GR Sport is 1,880mm tall overall, and Toyota claims a 265mm of ground clearance. The 2.8 litre 4-cylinder diesel engine in this Hilux does get a birthday, getting 10% more power and torque, so that is 165 kilowatts and 550 newton meters. No, it's not as potent as the Raptor, but some buyers will prefer diesel in this kind of vehicle, and I've got to say that extra punch, along with a recalibrated 6-speed automatic gearbox, is a noticeable improvement. Unlike the Raptor, we've got a regular part-time 4-wheel drive system in the Hilux, with rear-wheel drive only on the bitumen and shift-on-the-fly engagement. Alright, first car we're behind the wheel of on the road and around town is the Ranger Raptor. Now, a couple of things to point out. Firstly, this is a petrol-powered 4-wheel drive ute. It's not diesel, so it doesn't have that similar sort of clatter and I guess general vibe that you get from a diesel-powered ute, and 90% of the utes you buy these days are diesel. This one is petrol. It's not a smooth and utterly quiet and refined diesel though. This is a 3-litre twin-turbo V6. It's got lots of power and torque, but it's got a fair amount of attitude as well. So it's petrol power, but it's not necessarily smooth and refined and quiet. This is fairly noisy, a little bit gruff. It's definitely got a lot of character and attitude going on. There's plenty of power and torque available, but in terms of just general driving, it's quite an easy thing to putt around town in because there's a lot of easy torque there available. Now, this 10-speed automatic gearbox, it's not perfect. It can shunt from time to time and feel a little bit imperfect and maybe busy as well as it jumps through all those gear ratios it has. But one thing I absolutely do love in this Ranger Raptor is the suspension, hands down. You don't need to be thrashing this thing across the desert to really appreciate it. It's a master of speed bumps actually, and it's really good at just smoothing out rough surfaces and doing the kind of job that you would expect of a really nicely sorted, even like a premium or luxury SUV in terms of ride quality. It is that good. And of course, we've got nearly 300 kilowatts of power available in this Ranger Raptor. So in terms of straight line performance, this is quite easily an outright winner. So you can pump up the performance, you can choose some different drive modes as well. And one thing I do like is choosing your different suspension setups, because this does have its own form of adaptive damping, I suppose. It can adjust the rebound damping in the shock absorbers to suit what you need to do. And what I like to do, you can stick it in sport, which stiffens it up. Don't worry about that though. I go for the off-road Baja mode, and that just softens off things even more, gives you nice absorption over speed bumps, just like this one. It's just got composure that four-wheel drive utes normally don't have, and it's such a benefit. You're not going to be driving across the Simpson Desert every day pushing this thing to the limit, but you will actually appreciate the ride quality of this car, I promise. Alright, I've got a challenge for this Ranger Raptor to take on, and it's a little bit out of the ordinary, I think. I would call this the mortal enemy of the four-wheel drive ute, in fact. It's the shopping centre car park. How easy is this thing to park in a tight space? Now I'm going to pretend that there's a few more cars around, but I'm going to try and get this thing in. Turn. This thing's got a bigger turning circle, a bigger wheelbase overall. Don't want to bump into that car because old mate's there. Parking sensor's going off. 360 camera is pretty good actually, it's not too bad. Good quality, you can see what's going on there. I'm getting that in. There's not a lot of room to spare on either side. This is Get it back far enough there, put that back in park. This Ranger Raptor is a big car. It's wider and it's longer than most other utes out there, and it's got this big width in terms of the footprint, the track width of the car. So it is big, and it does feel big behind the wheel also. So you feel like you're driving a big truck. It feels great at times, blah, blah, blah. But the shopping center car park, you do have to get used to the size of the vehicle overall. Thankfully, the camera system is good. You've got parking sensors front and rear, but maybe it will take a bit of acclimatization for some people to be comfortable with this thing in Westfield. All right, now it's time for the parking test in the Hilux GR Sport. Now I can tell you from the driving position here, I'm going to be putting this car into the exact same spot in the exact same conditions. The car feels smaller and it feels more nimble. It's definitely not as wide overall, and you've just got a better sense of what is going on around you. I've got a 360-degree camera here. It's definitely not the same quality as what you get in a Ranger Raptor, but it's still there and it's decent. Pretty handy thing to have. But just because this ute is so much smaller than the Ranger, this is, I guess, the average size of a four-wheel drive ute 10 years ago. They've all gotten bigger since. And while size does have its advantages, I think this just feels a little bit more nimble and easier to manage around town, which, if you're going to be doing things like shopping centre car parks all the time, you probably really will appreciate the size difference of this Hilux. We're now in the Toyota Hilux GR Sport, and of course you can tell this is a GR Sport because of my flash red seatbelt in this model. These cars, they're not performance cars in the true sense of things, I think, and if you're going to come to this vehicle, or any four-wheel drive ute for that matter, with high expectations of handling, you're going to come away disappointed. This Hilux, the steering feel is noticeably a lot heavier than the Ford Ranger Raptor in comparison, and that's because this has a relatively old school hydraulically assisted steering setup. The Ranger has gone electric in that regard, so it's mechanically different and it's a different feel as well. Once you get used to this Hilux, it becomes a non-issue, I think. You'll just feel a bit more weight in it when you're doing a three-point turn around town and that sort of thing. But once you're driving around, in terms of the way it runs through a corner, it's all typical, pretty good for a four-wheel drive ute. I'm not going to labour on that point too much because these are four-wheel drive utes. If you're buying something because you want a sports car, you should see a Hilux and run in the other direction. See a Ranger and run in the other direction as well, because they're not that kind of car. But in terms of the other parts of the driving experience, the more important parts, that's one of them right there. So that was a speed bump. Pretty sure I went over the same speed bump in the Ranger Raptor at about the same speed, and I can tell you probably didn't even notice it from where you were watching this video. You can notice it in this car. So this vehicle has had upgraded suspension in comparison to a regular Hilux, but it's not done to the same level as a Ranger Raptor. It's not as complete and massive in terms of changes overall. We've got different dampers here, we've got an increased ride height, but the suspension feel is still, I would say, quite typical for a Hilux. It feels a bit stiff and jiggly, and if you start to go over rougher surfaces a bit more often, especially not the bigger hits, but the smaller hits as well, just uneven surfaces, you'll feel the ute jiggle around underneath you. You'll hear things shake and that sort of thing. So it's just not on the same level as the Ranger Raptor, and I mean, you just have one look underneath the cars and you can kind of tell that from looking at them. This is a different kettle of fish altogether. But other things to talk about here, we haven't got the same amount of performance on offer as the Raptor as well. We've got approximately half the amount of horsepower, but a similar amount of torque, and the upgrades to this GR Sport have actually gone a pretty long way, I think. It does feel peppier from behind the wheel. Toyota have also recalibrated both the throttle and the gearbox tuning as well, just to make this feel a little bit more engaged and responsive, and it does make for, I think, a better driving vehicle overall. There is one area where this Hilux does have a distinct advantage over the Ranger Raptor, and that is fuel economy. This turbo diesel engine, you'll see numbers always, more often than not, in the 9s. I think around 9.5 is what we've been averaging recently, and in the Ford Ranger Raptor, well, I doubt you're ever going to see anything in the single digits. So this has the better fuel economy figure, and therefore it's also got the longer driving range between refills. So if you are looking to do some long distance touring and desert crossing and that sort of thing, this Hilux GR Sport might shape up as being the best option just on that idea alone. But of course, talking about off-road, I think we're finished with the on-road driving for now. These are the two off-road performance models in their range, and they've got to perform off-road. So I think the Ranger has quite safely got the advantage so far on-road. Let's see if that's the same story when we get out into the bush. Now, in terms of off-road driving, let's start with the Toyota. And it's worth noting that in standard form, the four-wheel drive Hilux is an excellent off-road vehicle. It offers plenty of articulation from the rear leaf springs, traction control is one of the best in the business, and the relatively small dimensions of the Hilux allows it to feel a little bit nimbler and more agile on technical tracks. The changes to the suspension here helps in terms of clearance, but not so much in terms of low speed off-road capability. Stiffer front springs aren't an upgrade in some cases, and the same old tyre diameter means usable ground clearance, especially around the rear live axle area, is no different to a regular model. So it's still good, but so is a regular Hilux, and this one doesn't necessarily shift the dial forward in any big or meaningful way. And to make matters worse, you can't actually use that excellent off-road traction control system and the locking rear diff at the same time. Because of Toyota's calibration, these are mutually exclusive. On the other side of the coin, the Ford Ranger Raptor looks, feels and drives like an entirely different beast off-road. It's much taller through the suspension, and an increase in tyre diameter means this gets even more clearance front and rear. They might not be an amazing tyre in the wet on the bitumen, but I've got to say these BF Goodrich tyres are a solid off-road choice for a variety of conditions. And having a 33-inch diameter with plenty of sidewall in these 17-inch wheels means you can air them down a long way for a bigger footprint off-road. The off-road traction control system here is not as good. It is pretty good, but the Toyota's one is still better. But I've got to say, having locking differentials front and rear in this Raptor is a powerful ally in rough terrain. And it gives plenty of traction, and it allows you as a driver to use as much of that suspension articulation at low speeds as you can. And I've got to say there is a fair bit on offer. And while the Hilux GR Sport might offer an extra dose of high-speed off-road performance in comparison to a regular Hilux, the Raptor is in absolutely another universe in this regard. There's loads more power and performance on offer through the drivetrain, but it's those Fox dampers with loads of built-in technology that allows this car to collect and carry speed in an absurdly controlled fashion. It's an amazing car to drive off-road. So the Raptor does come with a higher asking price overall, sure, but you've got to think about the more holistic approach that Ford has taken to this vehicle being a performance ute. The engine has changed, the chassis has been extensively modified as well, and we've got exotic race-bred dampers here and coil springs all round, along with a big upgrade to the tyres. The fact that the Hilux GR Sport keeps a diesel engine, along with better towing and payload credentials, might sway some buyers in that direction, and I do understand that logic. But you could also argue that if these are the most important factors for you as a ute buyer, you are looking at the wrong utes anyway. And for me, this is worth the extra spend of the Raptor to get the full experience. It's nicer inside, as well as being more comfortable and spacious overall. And it doesn't seem to matter if you're either cruising on the highway, battling through traffic, rock crawling up in the mountains or hooning around in the bush, the Ford Ranger Raptor is a much better experience in just about every way.